John Moses Browning was born on January 23rd, 1855. At the age of 13 in his father's gun shop, he made his first firearm, and at the age of 24 in 1879, he got his first patent, first of nearly 200 patents on a gun. There is nothing that you can pick up today in the firearms world that doesn't have some of John Browning's influences in it, and today we're going to look into Browning shotguns, some of the history behind them, some of the models that have existed, and hopefully it's quite exciting. So as I said, John Browning invented some of the greatest guns the world has ever known. To name a few, we have the M1911 pistol, the Browning High Power, the M1917 machine gun, the M1919 machine gun, the BAR, the Browning Auto Rifle, the Browning Auto 5, the first ever semi-automatic shotgun, the Browning Auto 5. We're not going to touch on that too much today, but I mean, we wouldn't have most of what we got today without that. So I mean, that's great, isn't it? And what most importantly we're going to focus on today, the Browning Superpost. The Browning was a very early concept over and under in the 1880s. They weren't at all popular and they weren't at all common at this point. In fact, side by sides reigned supreme. It took Browning a lot of years to develop a system that he was actually really happy with, and in fact, he never saw it completed. In 1926, John Browning died, and the development was taken over by his son, Val A. Browning. The gun was finally released as the Browning Superpost in 1931, being produced in the FN factory in Herstal, Belgium. The available models were the Grade 1 Standard or Lightning, the Pigeon, the Diana, and the Midas, all of which were fairly different, but all built on the same Superpost action. After World War II, production picked up in 1948 and carried on until 1960, when the Superpost was superseded by the B25 range as we know it today. I think they called the model 205-6. From then it has remained little changed. They're still made in Belgium, the B25s, except the range has expanded somewhat more recently. The original base grade was the Browning A1, a black action gun, and there was a couple of models of this. They had traps, sporters, and they had lightweight game guns. The lightweight game gun was very popular, however the trap guns became more popular as time went on, and actually they have influenced very heavily the sort of guns and styles we use today. The B25A1 as it is has become very popular for customization. Because it's such a bland gun, very soft action, you can have them engraved with whatever you want. Most people will buy them, rip the stock and fore end off, put the stock and fore end of nicer wood quality on it, and have them engraved with some custom work. However, remembering that it's just an A1 underneath doesn't really make much of a difference, because an A1 internally is finished just as well as the higher grades. Higher grades come in B, C, D and M grades. This very much dictates the wood and sort of finish level. However, the engraving patterns are done by a number prefix thereafter. The most common one will be the B25 B2G will be the one you'll see. A B2G is probably the most common. That is a 2B wood 2G engraving series. Where a B25 series are handbuilt, even the A1s have a bit of soul about them, and as you go up through the grades, each of them will have a very individual character. So to say one A1 is great, or if you have a bad experience with an A1, perhaps try another one before slating them all. A cheap A1 will set you back £600 or £700, however beware, they have had a lot of work and they are not the toughest guns in the world. They do take the odd rebuild. Probably, they need the rebuilds now. You know, we're talking these are now 50 or 60 years old. Going up through the grades, you can expect to pay about 2,000 to 3,000 for an entry-level, poorish quality B2G, and pretty much the sky's the limit in terms of if you want a modern custom Browning or a modern B25. The first major change to Browning's range came in 1973 with the Browning Satori. They'd been working with Maruku for a couple of years and finally decided, let's produce a cheaper entry-level shotgun based on the design that Maruku was already kind of building of the Superpost, or the B25, and let's produce it in Japan and make it a little bit more accessible. So they did, and actually it really did very well. In fact, obviously they're still making them in Japan today, so that relationship was very strong, and the gun quality that was being made out there was very, very worthy of Browning's name. The Satori is still available in some parts of the world, however in the UK we've actually dropped the Satori name out of it, although we can still obviously find early Satoris and some imported Satoris from abroad. They came with a 26 to a 32 inch barrel, all had the classic Browning full width pin, the full width locking bolt, all had single triggers and ejectors, and again, like I said, they were a very accessible price point. The real difference between a Satori and a Belgian Browning, a B25, is that a B25 is made in two pieces. The forend stays connected to the barrels. On a Satori, it's obviously a three-piece gun. This was obviously Browning's idea that you had two hands, the gun should have two halves. It makes perfect sense, however, the gun making that it requires to get a forend to stay on the barrels nicely, it's just easier to make a three-piece gun, which is why the Satori and all the guns that have been born from it in Japan have that 3-piece assembly. It also gives that B25 a little bit of exclusivity. In fact, if you look at some of the really nice B25s, you'll notice that the fore end itself is in 3 pieces, so only the bottom half of the fore end moves forward. That is gun-making class. Roll on 1988 and Browning released the Browning 325, or the Satori 325, depending where you are in the world. This was a mild update on Satori. Not a lot had changed, but it was just modernised, if you like. The 325 is available again with 26 to 32 inch barrels. They did sporter and game variants. They did grades 1 all the way through to grade 6. There are some backboard versions, there are some non-backboard versions. In fact, with the 325 you'll find more standard boards, more 18.4s than anything else. They didn't really backboard them until later. When they made it for quite a big run, you'll see a lot of developmental changes. So you'll see some with fixed choke, some with Invector, and some with Invector Plus. The way they made the barrels changed a bit as well. The 325s were originally a chopper lump, however you'll find some later ones will actually be built on a monoblock, and they are pretty much a 425. As well as that, the barrel weight will vary a lot because the way they actually produced the barrels changed in the tubes. This is because they actually changed the weight distribution, the barrel thickness, and as they overboard the barrels, they actually removed meat from the outside as well, so they lightened the barrels. You'll find some early 325s, if you go for the multi-choke editions, can be very front heavy. Because they wanted to keep the overall weight lighter, because that was the fashion back then, they actually bored a lot out of the stock and still had the heavy barrels, so the guns will lend themselves to a bit more of a forward heavy finish, generally speaking. A basic grade 1 325 will be somewhere between 500 and £1,000. Really watch out at the 500 range. Again, you don't want to be buying one that's too worn out. The real thing to bear in mind with most every 325 is they are not chromed bores, and as such, any signs of pitting, do not buy it, or at least just don't buy it. That's the simplest way of putting it, right? In 1995, although there is some crossover because different release dates of different years for different guns happen across the world with Browning. They don't just blanket release. America gets some, we get some, so on and so forth gets some. So actually there can be up to 2 or 3 years overlap between models around the world. In 1995, however, in England, we received the 425, and this carried on all the way until 2002. All 425s are now monoblock. Obviously, a monoblock is significantly easier to make than a chopper lump. This kept production costs low and kept them on the affordable end of the market. The other thing to note with 425s is they were now chrome board, hard chrome boards, so actually they generally survive the test of time a little bit better. A lot like later 325s, the majority are a little bit overboard. In fact, we in the UK have some of the only tightboard ones around because of our more fiberboard dominant market. Again, the 425 came in a grade 1 all the way through to a grade 6, and you can expect to pay anywhere from about 650, 700 all the way to about 1100 for a really nice grade 1 425 if you can find one. The higher grades do command a slightly better price, obviously, but not the same sort of level as you'd expect. You can pick up a grade 5 for, you know, under £2,000 now. Before we take a step forward, let's take a step across to a bit of an obscure one. The BT99 was a Browning single barrel trap gun. This was available from 30 to 34 inch barrels, and as far as I can aware, is still available in some parts of the world today. However, it's not available in England. The other thing I mentioned whilst I'm stepped across is the Browning GTI range. The GTI range is essentially the clay-specific version, or the sporting or trap-specific version of the 325s and the 425s, and was replaced when the 525s were released with the Ultra XS. Essentially what you were getting was a plain action, the most advanced tubes that they had potentially. In fact, I started on a Browning GTI Plus. Brilliant guns, beautiful red engraving. What more could you possibly want? This was replaced with the GTI Ultra, so it went GTI, GTI Plus, GTI Ultra, and then that was eventually released. You do get the Browning Ultra that came between the Browning GTIs and the Browning Ultra XSs, but just bear in mind that there's nothing usually particularly special about these, apart from that the GTIs did have superior handling, generally speaking, at the time, and there's a lot of people that still kind of lust after that today, because they did shoot really well. So now we're on to the Browning 525. The 525 was released around 2002 and is still in production today. However, today now we've got the 725, the production is significantly lower in terms of choice. At their peak there was, I think, something like 130 different possible combinations or something, and that is pretty awesome, and that's just in one grade. That is just in the base grades. They're all monoblock, they're all chrome bores, but most importantly with the 525, they changed 2 things from the 425. That being they made the barrels lighter, try and bring the weight into balance a little bit more. And secondly, they actually redesigned the geometry of the hammers so that the trigger pulls, which were extremely spongy when it came to the 425, well, extremely spongy, they just weren't perhaps as crisp as some of the other guns that were coming out. So now you have a slightly better trigger pull than you did on a 425 in a 525, and then they've updated that again for the 725 to increase your trigger pulls again, and in fact now give you a mechanical trigger, whereas everything else was inertia. Anyway, before we move on too far, it's worth saying a 525 is available in 6 grades once again. However, the grade 6s are significantly rarer. They also did a side-plated range as well. In 2004, Browning released the Synergy that kind of runs along parallel. It's a different range to the standard Superpost, and actually they went to the drawing board and started again. They've tried a completely different array of designs. The whole point here was to try something new. They've been making a very similar gun for like nearly the last 100 years, and so they took what they had, they threw it all away, they went to the drawing board, as I've said, and they said, all right, so what do we want? Oh, they wanted a lower action, they wanted different things, they wanted adjustability, they wanted different tubes, they wanted a different ejector system, and they tried it all. And it is very different. The original series was released in wood and black plastic, the Black Ice edition, and I remember when they came out, they were so cool. Everybody wanted one until you bought one, and then everyone bullied you for them. Plastic guns back then weren't available as they were today, and as such it was cutting edge, super cutting edge. Nowadays it's kind of just accepted as a thing, but I remember 15 years ago when they were released that it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating to everyone, myself included. I couldn't wait to get behind one, and again I had one for a short period of time back then, but was bullied out of it because it was so modern and amazing and wild, and I was so young and influenceable. The early Synergies are probably worth avoiding. They can have some issues and so on and so forth. They did an update, I think around 2009, 2010, that made them significantly stronger in the ejector department, which was their real main failing. The Synergy market is a difficult one. Where they're quite expensive new, the second-hand prices are generally strong. However, there's always some people out there willing to sell them for nothing because they're kind of scared of what they are, and especially early ones that have seen a lot of use don't fetch huge money at all. The Synergies were also cutting edge when it came to handling. You know, the plastic one was so front heavy, it changed the perception of what a gun could be, and again that's influenced a lot of what the market has today. In fact, Browning as a company has influenced a lot of things over time. We'll take a step back quickly before we take a step forward again to the Browning B125. The B125 was the first of Browning's guns that was made in Japan and finished in Belgium. It was a very nice concept. Essentially what you got was a cheaper action but the nicer quality of finish. It was a nice mid-level gun, and in fact they have stepped back to that with the B15 they've released recently. The B125 was available I think for only 4 years, but came in 4 grades, and they're all mostly available today. The B125s, you could pick them up for like 1,200 quid, and I think they're probably one of the best bargains out there. However, you do need to look after them because again they do not have the chrome bores you'd expect today. These were back in the early 80s, by the way. Anyway, back on track. The B625, Satori 625. I'm not going to say anything about that because we don't have it in England. That is an American model only, although I do have a friend who's got one, and essentially what it is a B525 with different headworks that don't change stocks over, as far as I can make out. The B725 all of a sudden was released in 2012, and this was a big redesign. Suddenly they took the B25 action, they shrunk it all down, and essentially what they were doing was trying to get a sleeker feel, take a little bit of the Beretta market that was getting very, very powerful. A lot of what they found was people liked the Synergy dimensions but didn't perhaps like a few of the things that about it otherwise, and as such they took the B25, they turned it into a Synergy dimensions but kept that Browning solidarity, reliability, and that Browning feel, you know, that B25 feel. You'll find that some early 725s maybe aren't too clever on the handling. However, now the range is very, very good. They seem to have perfected some of the weights and balances and have released some of their guns which are really very tip top. The real beauty for 725, although it is a very slow profile gun, you still have a full width crosspin and a full width locking bolt, so you still have a lot of that Browning principle, if you like. You also get the Invector DS, the double seal chokes. That was a real change. Essentially what they did was remove a lot of that sort of tromboning, that bulging at the end of the barrel to give you a slimmer line choke. It's very clever, really nice, and again has removed a lot of the weight at the front, trying to get the guns more balanced, a little bit more neutral. And that's pretty much where we're at today in terms of models. You have the B725, you have the B525, and a couple of variants thereof, the hardcore sport variants of thereof in the over and under. You also obviously have the B25 range still available from Belgium. They have, however, added a few others, but before we go into them, we're going to take a little sidestep once again to the Browning Medalist. The Browning Medalist was a gun not made by Browning, but made by a company called Fias, and in their early days, they're actually made by Zolly, who are now obviously getting bigger and more popular. What they were was a really cheap entry-level Browning. They didn't even say Browning on them, and as far as anybody should be concerned, they're not a real Browning at all. In fact, they are just a cheap Italian gun. Yes, they are slightly better perhaps than some of the cheap Italian guns, but in reality, don't buy it and think you bought a Browning. That would be a mistake. Buy it and think you've got a decent cheap over and under. I'd probably avoid the 12 bores. A lot of them had a lot of abuse and have a little bit more issues perhaps in regulation than the 20 bores. The 20 bore is the one to buy if you are buying one. and that's pretty well received all round. The parts, however, are hard to find, chokes are almost impossible to find, and they are not a Browning. They're just like its ugly crap cousin that's nowhere near related to it. It's not even like it's an ugly crap adopted cousin. It's probably the best way to put it with the Medalist. However, they are still a good gun in their own right. However, not to be missed with all of these other models I've said. So back in 2015, they released the B15. The B15 is a B725 Japanese gun, finished in Belgium. Really nice, about 10 grand, and essentially they're trying to rekindle some of that B125 spirit, and they really have. They're a brilliant gun, they look fantastic, they handle well, and embodies a lot of what Browning's about, both on the Japanese side and from the Belgian side. Brilliant, and beautiful guns too. The last thing I should say about the Browning models is they have recently renamed the Browning Custom Shop, the place that used to make the B25s, as the John M. Browning Collection. So instead of I've got a Browning Custom Shop gun, you could say I've got a gun from the John M. Browning collection. It's nice, it's emotive, and I expect it works. However, you know, most of everyone will still refer to it as the Custom Shop, probably. If you do want a gun from there, it can take up to 3 years to build it for you. I mean, that's pretty insane. They are still amazing. However, a true custom gun out there starts, and is going to be really quite plain, at just under 20 grand. What you do get, however, is not the exponential increase you do, let's say, between a Beretta Silver Gem 1 and a WLL, which is 5 times the cost. In fact, very small amounts of money percentage-wise on the initial investment will see beautiful gains in terms of quality. But we're not going to go into that too much today. We just wanted to mention it. Alright, I think that's pretty much me done on the Brownings. If you've got any questions, please ask below. Yes, we haven't touched on semi-automatics today, but we probably shall. Because the Auto 5 was the first one out there, it deserves a video of its own, or a series perhaps of its own, everything you need to know about Browning semi-autos. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Take care, goodbye, and we'll see you next time.